Hello again, Tim.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Lowport Podcast.
The lowest port you could possibly imagine.
All the
Um,
Lowport, all the time.
so, this episode is going to be about getting better. And we're going to specifically talk about what you and I might feel like we need to work on, and maybe even make observations about one another that we think we could work on to get to that next level, whatever that next level is. And so, like for you, Tim, you're a pro shooter. You're a multi division grandmaster. You've won area matches and all sorts of big deal matches. But are you completely satisfied with your career? Or have you achieved everything you want to achieve?
Not yet. Obviously, the only thing that's really eluded me at this point is a national title, and obviously a world title, which I'm working on. Right, so that's what I'm working on most steadfast is to kind of get that monkey off my back. I finished I finished in the top three a couple of times. At nationals, I've had some podium finishes. Just haven't quite yet been ready. Or been able to take the top spot. But a lot of it's in my own preparation. A lot of it has been my own like my own priority list, and sometimes the years that I want to do the best, unfortunately, shooting had, kind of been deprioritized, like competing at the highest level have been deprioritized in lieu of like building my business as a full-time trainer, and kind of traveling a national circuit to teach. My kids are now a little bit older and kind of grown and out of the house now, which is great. So it's not great because I'm
Nice.
like good riddance kids, but it's great. They're
Yeah.
becoming young adults. They're on their own. They're doing their own thing. But it has freed up some time for me to really pursue, like kind of going in like head first into the deep end of like what can I truly kind of reap, from my benefits and like reap from my expenses in practice and in shooting, all together. So for me, being able to strike a balance between teaching full time and also trying to be a high level competitor as well. Like I said, to strike that balance is really, really difficult. Because the last thing you want to do sometimes when you get home from being on the range for 3, 4, 5, 6 days straight is come home and be on the range some more, focusing on your own, on your own performance and your own progression. Um, it's it's easy to create excuses, right? And everybody out there has a million excuses that they can use in place of, I want to get better, but, and that but list is, 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages long. But, I work from 7 in the morning till 6 in the evening. But my wife's got a list of honeydew stuff, by the time I get home. But my kids are young and, parenting time is important. And so, like, learning where to prioritize your time, to other things. In the grand scheme of things, being a pro shooter is great, and being a professional instructor is fantastic. It's how I make my living. So being that teaching is how I make my living, my number one priority is ensuring that my business is successful. So much more so than the fact that like I'll spend more time in the range working on like curriculum development for the benefit of my students, more so than I'll go to the range and spend 500 rounds just working on like benefiting myself. But because of that, and not wanting to be uh, self-servant and wanting to be, kind of selfless and working and helping others, it's kind of been to my own detriment, So, I've been very fortunate to be a top 10 level competitor for years now, but top 10 is kind of one of those things where I'm like, man, I'd like to be that top two guy. I'd like to be that top guy, So, last year I really kind of put in the extra effort. I kind of doubled my efforts as far as round count, time on the range. Obviously completed, built my own range. I've got my own backyard here too, out here in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. But like I'm not I'm tired of
There's
making.
no excuses at that point, by the way. If you have your own range in your backyard,
I do.
you better get out there and put some rounds
That's the
down.
thing, right? It's like, well,
Yeah.
it's like having your own home gym and then
Yeah.
creating every excuse under the sun as to why you didn't go to your own home gym and work
Well,
out.
my garage is a bit chilly, Tim.
Right,
It is,
but everybody does this, right? I mean, we
and the
all
bench
have to
is
fight
cold on
these.
my skin.
Yeah, we all have to
Yeah.
fight these demons, so to speak, of like, how much effort do I really want to put into this, And so for me, I've kind of been tired of making excuses, and I've been doing something about it. So, you know, um, it was easy for me to discredit, you know, dry fire on the days that I'm traveling. Like, oh man, I've spent all day in airports traveling to, such and such location to prepare for a class. And I'm going to spend 2 days on the range teaching 12 to 14 students. And then, oh, okay, well, it's Monday. It's time to pack up my stuff and just get home. And it's easy to make those excuses when you get back to the hotel. Like, man, I'm just too tired. I've been on the range. My feet hurt. I just want to take a shower. I just want to lay in bed and wake up the next morning and do it all over again. And because of that, like, that's 4 days out of 7 that you're making excuses not to dry fire for 15 or 20 minutes. That's time. Then when you get home, you're like, man, I haven't seen my family, in 4 days. It's Monday afternoon. I want to just hang out and kind of like Netflix and chill with my wife, and, just hang out and eat a home cooked meal and just rest and relax. And the problem is that turns into, I didn't do anything on Tuesday, and then I don't do anything on Wednesday. And then Thursday, it's time to get repacked and ready to go again. And so this year, it's been like, no more excuses, put in the work no matter what, every single day. I'm doing something, whether it's dry firing for 20 to 30 minutes, whether it's getting out to the range and shooting even 100 to 200 rounds, or, like putting in the effort of a half a case of ammo, So I've been, the main thing for me is motivation. That's been the biggest thing is
Well, Tim,
yeah,
one thing that's tough for you is you're traveling all the time,
sure.
and
But it's
when
but
you travel,
exactly the thing, Josh.
the
Traveling more
tyrants.
becomes like, oh my God, how do you find the time? Well, for the long time, I wasn't finding the time. It was easier to make the excuse, nah, just got to get to the hotel, get a bite to eat, and be ready for class in the morning. Well, like, I'm doing myself a disservice. I'm also doing my students a disservice if I'm not putting in the effort to make myself better. Then how can students trust that I'm doing everything I can to make them better as well? So
Well, just all
that's
the
been
time spent in airports. What can you do? The tyrants in the government make you check your bags, but there is a new technology that can free you from this tyranny. So with Ace VR, which you're quite adept with,
right.
I'm sure you could carry Ace VR on the airplane. So
I could.
there's nothing stopping you from doing airport terminal dry fire with Ace VR. And I would really like to see a video of that. I'm sure I can't imagine any possible problems of you doing
Nope, me
that,
neither. Not at
and
all.
I think you should do that on your next trip.
I'll try it next week. We'll see how it
Yeah,
goes. If you
you
receive
might
a
you might actually. This is a good opportunity to plug Ace
great
VR because
call,
I don't have it nearby, but I bought it after I saw all your fun videos of it, and it's an awesome training aid. It's something in between dry fire and live fire, and it's really fun. Um, to
that's the big
to
thing.
to
It's fun and
yeah,
it's engaging. It's easy to put the headset on real quick and just grab the pistol and start getting to work,
it's
and
so easy. And just the other day, I realized you can create a room and then invite people to like join you and shoot with you. And so I
exactly.
invited my buddy Drew, who got the system after he like tried mine out, and we were just like shooting together, doing like a little kind of casual match,
Uh-huh.
and pointing guns at each other and just like dumping mags into each other's heads. And it was it was so fun. I like it. It's just another thing. And so I found myself kind of now like I'll do like maybe one day I'll do like mostly like traditional dry fire with my real gun, and then I'll have like an Ace VR day, and then not so much live fire for me lately, but I try to mix that in usually more. But yeah, it's just something in between dry fire and live fire, and there's a really fun element to it. It's a fantastic product.
I think the good thing about this year too, that's kind of motivated me a lot, is because like shooting a match, like a major match earlier in the year. So a couple of a couple 2 3 weeks ago was the U.S. Extreme Open, and you shot the Caribbean Open. We talked about on a previous episode. Um, that that was a great, like I said, a great test of kind of where my skill is currently, and it also gives me some assessment on where I really need to kind of ramp my training, or to kind of wrap my head around where I need to improve as well. So because of that match, it's helped me to kind of to to really create a training regimen that I think is going to work best for me. Um, my movement has always been pretty good, um, but I've not been as risk averse as I should be when I'm trying to go after maximum point values, right? So like knowing that my IPSC National Championships is coming up in April, that's going to be, I mean, that's going to absolutely push or prioritize points at a premium, right? So, like making sure that I'm harvesting every single alpha I possibly can when I'm shooting. So it's kind of revamped the way I kind of I've kind of pursued training here over the last 6 months, where everything's been like, I'm going to shoot on the move, I'm going to shoot this swinger in one pass, I'm going to like really kind of training all of just like the absolute efficiencies, but it's kind of been at the detriment of like making sure I'm capturing all the points I possibly can on a stage. So like learning that balance of where to be risky and where to be averse to risk. Like should I stay put here and shoot these targets stationary versus shooting them on the move and bleeding off a few extra points. And so it was eye opening for me. So it's changed a lot of how I'm pursuing like my movement training, how I'm kind of negotiating my day to day training activities. Um, I'm a little less focused on gun handling, as far as like draws and reloads in my dry fire, and I'm more focused on uh, like visual perception, vision speed, processing speed, those types of things. Making sure my eyes are ahead of the gun to every target, making sure 100% that I'm calling good hits on the targets instead of like chasing par times and things, which is something a lot of guys they'll get wrapped up in doing in the past in their dry fire. And in a live fire, I'm allowing hit factor, so points divided by time. I'm allowing the actual hit factor, so I'm scoring all of my drills just like I do, um, just like you would score a match. And so I'm instead of just focusing on the time from a timer or focusing on just the accuracy, I'm blending both of those together and really buckling down and utilizing hit factor to kind of give me the roadmap, so to speak, on where I need to direct my training. So if the hit factor is not there where it needs to be, if I'm bleeding off too many points in the pursuit of speed, then I'm going to back things off again and kind of readjust and recalibrate. So it's been good. It's been very fruitful
Wow.
lately.
Yeah, that's a lot of information. I mean, obviously for new people, like getting fundamentals down through repetition is a big deal. You got to be able to draw, you got to be able to reload, you got to be able to break clean shots where you're aiming. But I love your philosophy of training and actually doing hit factor scoring. I think that does not allow you to lie to yourself, because the metric that you apply to yourself in practice is the metric that's applied to you in a
That's
match.
right. And
And
it's so
so
easy to do. It's so easy to get wrapped around like, oh, the timer tells me I'm faster.
practice scores on our phone, so you can
Exactly.
just enter every single score.
The timer
So
tells me I'm faster. It's okay to dismiss that Charlie and that Delta that I shot on that target because the time was faster. Well, the time might have been faster, but if the points deficit, even though the time is faster, if the points deficit is telling me that the hit factor is actually less, then that's a bad rep. That is not the path I want to go down. So, and it helps you to stay 100% accountable for what you're doing in your own practice.
awesome. Yeah. So I remember in a previous episode you talked about watching Eric Graffel at the big IPSC match in
Uh-huh.
Florida. Did you take anything away from watching him specifically? Because I watched a video recently on YouTube where he was talking to JJ Arcaza at SHOT Show. I don't know if it was this year or previous year, about how he approaches a stage and kind of breaks down things in terms of hit factor. And JJ and like myself, and I think most people that I've interacted with, maybe it's the USPSA thing, think a lot in terms of the points that different things cost you. But it almost sounded like listening to the whole conversation that Eric thinks more in terms of time. And that seemed really like maybe almost the better way to think about it, because he gave an example where he was talking about like shooting a swinger. And if you think you have a mic on the swinger, is it worth waiting for it or not? Well, if you think in terms of points, it's almost always going to be worth waiting to get that point. But if you
Right.
think in terms of time, well, that almost forces you to think just in terms of hit factor and be like, well, I could get 5 more points best case if I shoot an alpha on the next pass, but that's going to cost me a second and a half based on the expected hit factor of the stage. Is that worth it? And so
Right.
I thought that was super interesting to think about it from that perspective. And it's
So
such
the
a
hit factor
simple,
itself, right? It basically
yeah,
what the hit factor does is it attaches a time to every point, right? So because what a hit factor is points divided by time gives you your points per second. So if you're not collecting X amount of points per second, any points that you're not collecting are costing you time. So it gives you an opportunity to look at like, okay, if I shoot a Charlie, right, it's 2 points down. Darn, I would like to have shot an alpha in because it gives me 5 points versus a Charlie gives me three. But what we don't look at is what are the 2 points that I've lost out on by shooting that Charlie instead of that alpha? What are those 2 points costing me in time? And there's a time value to every single point down if you're willing to kind of to math it out and look at it that way. And it was like talking to Eric over the 3 days of watching him shoot was extremely eye opening, where he would look at those types of things like, oh, this stage, he would look immediately walk up to a stage and be like, okay, this stage is 12 rounds. So this is 60 points. This stage is 60 points. And then he would just look at the stage for a brief moment and be like, okay, well, this is about a 7 hit factor stage. So that means you're going to collect about 7 points per second. So if there's 60 points to be had and you're collecting 7 points per second, how much time are you going to spend on the stage? And then every point deficit, every point down on that is costing you a certain amount of time. Where would you make the adjustment in your approach to shooting the stage? Where would you say it's okay to stretch the limits here and maybe shoot a Charlie to pick up extra time, versus here you absolutely positively cannot lose points because you can't, there's not enough time to make up the point deficit. And I thought that was really interesting. Like I've had a like over the last couple of years, and it's I teach that as well to students, but not to that depth of understanding that Eric kind of enlightened me to a few weeks ago. So like I said, it's really transformed how I'm approaching just my own practice, my own training. Like, okay, if I'm going to shoot this Charlie and I'm shooting an 8 hit factor stage, 8 points per second, that means that Charlie's costing me about 0.15 of a second, right? So 0.15 of a second, but that's 1 point. So actually a Charlie for me is a 2 point deficit. So that Charlie's worth zero point 0.3. So zero point 0.3 of a second, can I go faster than zero point 0.3 of a second? Can I improve my speed by zero point 0.3 to wash out that one Charlie deficit? And then when you have to kind of make those negotiations with yourself, it becomes much easier to say, you know what? No, I'm going to get my points here just at the speed at which I can. Or, okay, I can go a little faster here, but I also need to make sure I've got the wherewithal to hold myself to, say, only bleeding one Charlie away on this array instead of multiple Charlies. Like now I've got to see more. I've got to be able to put the gun in the right spots. I've got to be able to hold it there. I've got to be patient when I need to. And it's been good. My training at home
well,
has been really, really good lately.
that's fascinating to hear. And I think that actually that sounds so specific, but it applies at all levels. Like even if you're beginning in the sport, you need to have a sense of what hit factor scoring is, and the fact that when you have a lower hit factor stage, generally, you you really need to collect points, but you cannot sacrifice time. And that even on high hit factor stages, like you can't sacrifice time, but you really can't sacrifice that many points either. So it's a constant balance. And the way you approach that, changes with your skill level. But I bet like so when you're starting out, if you have an expected low hit factor stage, so like targets are spread out, they're farther, it's a difficult shot, 5 or lower hit factor, like you should just try to shoot alphas. That's probably good advice. If you have a bunch of close targets and there's 32 rounds, like they're all 7-yard targets, well, that's going to be a super high hit factor stage. You need to crush time, but you can't afford penalties either and stuff like that. But I
Right.
bet at Eric's level, he breaks down a stage like you were talking about. He knows how many points per second he needs to be earning. And he even maps that to things like, well, this is what my sight picture on that target needs to look like before I pull the trigger. And like all of these like every element of shooting and breaking down a stage comes together for him
Yep.
to like plan the optimal path, which
Well,
is
when you
super,
figure
super hard
you're a
to do.
9 or 10
But
time
yeah,
world champion, and you've
yeah,
been shooting since you're like 12 or 13 years old, you've probably got the sport figured out pretty well. So, but yeah, I mean, you're right. It's fascinating to hear, just to listen to him, like just to to kind of math it all out, and then but it makes sense. He's like, well, I'm not, I'm only going to give that swinger 2 passes because anytime more than that, no matter what, I've got to guarantee the alpha just to be a wash when I could be shooting this and collecting 10 more points, or I could shoot this and collect 8 more points. And like it was really neat to see how, like, he put all the pieces of the puzzle together before he even executed like his actual stage run. Like he knew what he was going to do with it to the almost to the 10th of a point. I mean, it was pretty incredible.
that is incredible. Yeah, that level of precision is absolutely nuts. All right, let me ask you two broad questions.
Okay.
Do you have to be a good athlete or an athletic person to be good at practical shooting?
No. Does athleticism help a little bit? Yes, athleticism is going to help you in every aspect of your life, not just shooting. I think a lot of folks believe that shooting, that especially USPSA, is a lot of athleticism with a little bit of shooting sprinkled in, and it's not. It's absolutely a shooting sport with a little bit of movement, a little bit of athleticism sprinkled in. Um, I mean, some of the greatest shooters to continue to shoot the game to this day are in their early to mid 60s and are still a threat to winning a national title every year that they go to nationals. We're talking about guys like Rob Latham. We're talking about guys like Todd Jarrett. I mean, these are guys that have been at the pinnacle of the sport since the early 80s, and they're still just as relevant today as they were 30, 40 years ago. Um, so they are walking proof that it's not an athletic event. It's a shooting event with a little bit of movement mixed in. So the things that you really want to focus on, like in your own practice and training, if you want to get good in practical shooting sports, are position entries, like having the gun up, ready to shoot, like having the gun aimed earlier than your intended target is available, so that the moment that target's available, you're ready to shoot it immediately. Versus getting into a position and then raising up the gun and aiming. So think about aiming earlier, think about doing things sooner versus trying to do things faster. And that sets you up for success there.
Yeah, recently Ben Steger he puts out a lot of good content on his YouTube channel.
Mhm.
He showed a
Absolutely.
video just about like kind of like entering and leaving positions, and he's talking about what shooting on the move really is, and even just like kind of shifting your weight and your balance, that
That's
is a
movement.
huge time saver that people don't appreciate, and he demonstrated
Correct.
pretty powerfully, I think, that concept, and so yeah, that's really
100%.
awesome to hear. You don't have to be super athletic. It does help, but efficiency of movement is what really matters. It seems like in this game,
100%.
where our longest stages are maybe 30 seconds, right? Okay, so let me ask you this: do
Okay.
you have to be smart to get good at practical shooting? Like, can you be a grandmaster without being a little bit smart about how you approach this?
I think smart is relative. I've known some knuckleheads that have like by brute force, right, have pushed their way to the, to some of the highest levels of shooting. I do think you need to be just a little bit intelligent, especially in how you approach training, so that you're kind of not navigating down some bad paths. It's sometimes we think brute force is the answer. Like, I will this to happen by I'm just going to keep throwing ammo at it until I fix whatever's ailing me. And that's about as productive as like banging your head against a brick wall most of the time. It's not very productive. Um, Whereas like if you institute just a little bit of logic into things, like, okay, I'm terrible at one-handed shooting. Okay, well, if you're bad at one-handed shooting, chances are that's probably what you need to be practicing, and figuring some things out there, instead of like, well, I'm terrible at one-handed shooting, but the next time I go to the range, I'm going to shoot two hands on the gun all the time, and I'm going to do the same three drills that I always do because I enjoy doing those. Like, that is not conducive to improvement, So it's like, if you want to find the things that that maybe you're a little subpar at or a little inefficient at, isolate those things and work on those things in isolation, right? And it doesn't take hours and hours and hours at the range. It's about being able to work a little smarter, a little more logical, into, okay, my last match, I struggled with hardcover, for instance, and this isn't me, I'm just hypothetically speaking. Man,
You never struggle with
I could
hardcover.
not stay off in no shoots or hardcover partials. So my next practice, my next training event for me, my next practice session, I'm probably not going to shoot a lot of like wide open targets that don't have partials or have no shoots or something attached to them, because I want to get better at like, I need to learn how to figure out how to shoot those at the same level of speed that I would shoot a wide open target, and develop not only the consistency but develop the confidence to know that I can, right? And so those are the things that, like, you really need to approach your training from a, what am I bad at? That's what I'm going to work on. What am I good at? Those are things I might dip a toe in the water once in a while to continue improving on, but that's not going to be the thing that I'm going to moderate the most of my time to working on, because I'm already good at those things, and we always like to go to and practice the things that we're really good at, because it makes us feel good about ourselves. Nobody likes to go to the range and work on the things that they're not good at, because it's hard, and like struggling, and sometimes leaving the range after you've run out of ammo or you've run out of resources for the day doesn't feel good sometimes, when you get in the car and leave the range and you're like, man, I I really suck at this. Like, I still have to figure this out. But I think there's a lot to be said for allowing kind of those observed failures to light the fire under you, to to kind of orchestrate how, like, to figure out when you get home, how am I going to get better? How am I going to go back and attack that again the next time to fix it? And that's my biggest motivator, is not the things that I'm good at. It's the things that I suck at, or the things that I'm a little inefficient at, that I want to get better at.
So to distill that into what the recipe is for getting better is basically, first and foremost, you need to be able to self-diagnose yourself.
Right.
Where are your strong points and what are your weak points?
Yes.
And you need to understand how to assess that. And then you need to have the will to actually work on your weak points. And
Yep.
then you need to have the physical mobility to walk through a stage without like a wheelchair or oxygen. And if you can do those things, then you can probably be pretty good at USPSA. So in
100%.
other words, I think almost anybody can like get into the sport and get pretty good at it with, the right amount of focus and effort, which I
100%.
think makes it really cool. I also think like um, it's just such an egalitarian sport. Like I know we have like women's category and stuff like that, and youth category, and all this and that, but I really feel like size and speed and strength is not such an advantage in this game as it is in some other sports and stuff like that. So I
100%.
feel like a lot of people compete on an even playing field, and I think that is just a really cool facet of this sport as well. So no matter who you are, I think you can come to this put in your due mental and physical effort to understand where you're strong, where you're weak, and continually work through that process of getting better on those elements, and you can get whatever you want out of this thing. And so it's a great sport in my opinion. So
I agree.
you explained that very well. Thank you.
You bet. You bet.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So what do I need to work on?
What do you need to work on? What have you found that you needed to work on over, say, your last match? What do you feel like you were deficient?
Well, I think, like we've talked about on previous episodes, one of the biggest problems for me was just like mental game, and I would let mistakes compound in my mind so that I would try to change things at matches about my technique, which was never good. And so I think recently I've started to get better at that. Um, but then I observe my performance in local matches, big matches, and classifiers and stuff like that. And I think when I'm shooting pretty good, I'm around like master class probably level, like shooting classifiers at the Caribbean Open. I was around 84%. That's close to like if it was a classifier being like master level.
It is. Yes, it is.
And against A level people here in Albuquerque who are probably sandbagging and open honestly. Um, I'm neck and neck, so they might arguably be masters and stuff too. So I feel like I should be an open master, and yet I'm not. And I'd really like to be an open grandmaster. And so I'm not sure exactly where I'm failing, other than I could say, oh well, I make mistakes early in the match, or this happened or that happened. But those are kind of hard things to fix.
So
So I don't know. Like in your,
I
so
think the
I submit
approach,
it to you
yeah. So
as a
I think the
trainer. Like,
approach,
are there major like technical difficulties, or is it mostly mental, or is it something I'm not
no,
even considering
it's
at this point?
it's a mental approach, and it's a little bit of a mental breakdown in like, okay, I'm going to shoot this stage, and a lot of it might be in what you're telling yourself is important to you, or what goals you've set for that particular match, right? So like if you go to a local match and you're like, you know what, today I'm not going to shoot any misses or any no shoots. Okay, well that sounds like a pretty good goal, except that goal is basically based on the negative, right? What I mean by that is you're saying my goal is to avoid something. The problem is your brain doesn't necessarily know the difference between don't and do. So when you say to yourself, I am not going to shoot any no shoots, or I'm not going to shoot it, I'm not going to have any mics there, it's almost like your brain says mics and no shoots coming up, and so like
Yeah,
trying to
you
shoot.
focus on that verbiage almost on what you're. Yeah,
Right. So trying to shoot in to avoid particular pitfalls versus like reinforce the positive, right? So like the thing you should be telling yourself, especially when you set your initial goals, like so let's say for tomorrow's match, for example, right? Like my I think a great goal for you to have isn't shoot clean, because shoot clean is too broad. What is shoot clean? Well, I mean, you could walk the stage, or crawl around on the stage in your hands and knees and set up on every single target and snipe every alpha and shoot clean, but that's not conducive to a really good score. But I think telling yourself, like, I think setting the goal of, I want to shoot 93% of available points on every single stage, or on stage one, I'm going to shoot 93% of the points. Okay, well, what's that mean? Well, great. Well, let's do a little bit of math and figure it out, right? So if the stage is worth 100 points, right? So it's 10 targets, and each target is theoretically worth 10 points. So that's 100 points. So what's 90% of that? Well, that'd be 90 points. So I need to shoot 90 points or better of that 100. So
he's
instead
right.
of thinking like, I'm going to avoid deltas, I'm going to avoid no shoots, I'm going to avoid mics, like the goal should be, or the approach should be, I'm going to shoot 90, 91, 92% of available points on this stage, no matter the cost, right? So now you're forcing yourself to adhere to the principle that of what you've laid out, right? That's my initial goal more than anything else. For you, it wouldn't even stop at 90% of points. I would say I want to shoot 95% of points, right?
Yeah,
So on a
major.
100-point
Yeah.
stage, it's 5 Charlies. That's all you're allowed on a 100-point stage. So if it's more than that, and I think that would be a good ultimate goal to have. like for every single stage, so that you can really start to really hone in on level of consistent execution and let that kind of drive more than anything else. Instead of
Well,
like,
I
I'm
think
going to win the
that's
stage on this, I've got to turn a burn, I got to go. No, your goal right now is to shoot 95% of available points. Not 95% alphas, 95% of the available points, right?
yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, and I was having a similar conversation with my father recently, where he shot a local match in upstate New York, and he shot the first stage pretty good, coming back after a pretty long layoff, and then he was like, I felt overconfident, and I just like shot a bunch of penalties on the second stage, and I was like, well, what does that mean? What do you mean you felt overconfident? And he's like, well, I just, I thought I was able to shoot as fast. So I said, well, you're not really following your process, and you don't have a goal for that match. You're just kind of going off emotional feeling of like, I'm shooting good, so I'm just
Correct.
going to like let it rip. But no, you need to approach with a philosophy of I'm going to shoot this level of points, or I'm going to shoot this percentage of the best time, or whatever the flavor is that you need to work on to make that work out.
And the thing in
And
your
so
practice
basically,
needs to be, instead of just the matches, the thing in your practice needs to be work on your consistency. And the thing about consistency starts at your very first rep of any drill. That becomes the most important rep of the day, just like your stage, right? So that way you're starting to instill that nervousness, that anxiety of, okay, I have to do it right now, one and done. This is the one that counts for all the marbles today, because that's the one you're going to kind of judge yourself ultimately on. And then once you do that, okay, now I have to do it 3 more times back to back to back. So now you're just keeping that anxiety level or keeping that mental pressure on yourself. I have to execute. Okay, well, I executed it once. Good, I'm one and done. Now I can turn on the afterburners and go fast. Like, no, 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 no. Now I want you to do it 3 more times in a row for a total of 4. Can I be within zero point 0.1 of my hit factor, high or low, and execute at a high level of consistency?
yeah, it's interesting the way you break it down like that, because I feel like at a match, local or major, like it's almost about harnessing your ability to shoot within yourself
Right.
and not make mistakes, not get penalties, not bleed points unnecessarily. Like you said, for me, like shoot 95% of points. Um, you're it's probably not a good approach at a match to like swing for the fences. Maybe like on the
Sure.
last stage, if you're down and you want to win, you swing for the fences. But otherwise, like that's the risk that you're introducing by shooting outside of yourself, to outside of your skill, to some extent is not going to be worth it. More often than
Exactly.
not, it's going to burn you more than it helps you fractionally.
Exactly.
So how do you get faster? Like how the heck do you do that?
In practice, that's where you have to suspend. So at some points in time in your practice, you have to suspend. Okay, I'm no longer going to be focused on points right now or accuracy. I need to start pursuing the speed and pushing the speed in front of my accuracy. If the points start, the accuracy degradation is going to happen for a bit. That's okay. I need to see, first of all, am I capable of performing at this particular level of speed? And then once I can, and once I kind of achieve that and kind of build the consistency there, then like I'm going to reprioritize like my thought process then to not say necessarily suspend speed, but it's like, okay, now I need to bring the shot accountability or the accuracy accountability back into that level of speed. And that's the progression level. How do I go fast? By going fast. Oh, but I'm going to miss the target. Okay, so you missed, but you're going to learn a lot every single time that you miss the target in practice. What you don't want to do is you don't want to prescribe to that that mental state when you're shooting a match. Matches are not practice. Matches are tests. Like, so my practice is where I wonder if I can get away with shooting 20 splits on that 25-yard target. Or, oh, nope, I can't do that. Well, maybe you're not capable of doing that yet, but because you have explored the speed side of things, perhaps now when you were shooting half-second splits at 20 yards, now all of a sudden you're capable of seeing everything you need to and shooting 35 splits. That's a 0.15 per shot improvement every single time you press the trigger. It's like you're still pursuing speed. You're stretching the limits just beyond your maximum capability of holding 100% accountability of points. That's okay, right? To explore that. Then you're going to put the points back in once you're kind of done exploring. And every practice session, there's going to be there's a part where it's 100% shot accountability and consistency, and there's a portion of my practice that is all about exploration of skills that I'm still trying to achieve.
That's right. So another way of saying that might be is you're not going to get better at a match. You're not going to get faster at a match, and you're not going to get more accurate. And if you try to do one versus the other, you're probably going to trade off on either and have a negative outcome. Like you have a ceiling of skill that's established through the effort you've put in through practice and dry fire.
Right.
And you should try at the match to shoot at that level to the extent you can.
As
If you
consistently
try
as
to
you can.
if you try to shoot beyond that, you're going to have problems because you're going to shoot penalties and miss and low points and stuff like that. If you try to lay up and shoot below that, well, you're just bleeding time. And so shooting at your level is the art of matchcraft, I think. And then increasing your level is the art of practice craft, if that's even a word. So yeah, very interesting.
100%. So
All
I
right.
hope
Well, I'll
that
try to
helps.
shoot 95% of points tomorrow. We'll see what happens.
We're going to set some goals tomorrow morning. That will be our thing.
All
So get to the
right.
range a little
Yeah.
early. I'm going to get my stage set and built, and then we will discuss goals that I want to put in place for you for tomorrow.
All right. When are you getting there, buddy?
I'm going to get there about 8 a.m.
Okay. I'll see you then.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right, man. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. Guys, we'll see you later.
All right. Have a good one, everyone.